You've been told to reduce stress, but what if the real solution to your patients' or clients' chronic health problems isn't to reduce it, but to actually add more stress? On today's episode of the Simplified Functional Medicine Podcast, we're going to be talking about why more stress, not less, is the answer. So let's get started. So hey everybody, welcome to the show. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about why adding more stress might just be the solution to today's most common chronic health issues. We're not talking about the toxic, soul-crushing kind of stress, but controlled, calculated stress that rewires resiliency and helps at a cellular level. And so we're talking about hormesis or hormetic strategies. So welcome everybody to today's episode. We're going to dig right in and talk about hormesis, hormetic strategies, and why really at the end of the day, when you look at the landscape of functional medicine, real functional medicine, this is where the puck seems to be headed when we look at where things are going to be able to help people who are dealing with today's most common chronic health issues. So Dr. Wells, welcome to the show. Let's get right into it. First and foremost, what is hormesis or hormetic strategies? Why does this matter? And why do you think the puck is heading in this direction with regard to functional medicine?
I want to start off actually a slightly different direction, Dr. Woolner, about stress that some of you may not have heard before. And we're going to talk about hormetic stresses, but one of the things that I wasn't aware of until somewhat recently, you actually clued me into this book, was this concept that stress is only bad for you if you think it's bad for you.
Yes.
Which is a weird concept. And I'm not being like cute when I say that. There was an amazing book written by Dr. Kelly McGonigal. We've referenced this book quite a bit before. She's a Stanford researcher, and she did, I believe it was her PhD work was set out to prove that stress was bad for you. And they looked at a study. It was like an 80-year-long study. It was a very long study with thousands of people, like 30,000 people.
Yes.
And they found that people that at high levels of stress, and also thought that stress was bad for them, were the most likely to die early. However, people that had high levels of stress, but framed stress as good for them and beneficial to them, actually lived the longest in the study, which seems paradoxical. And if you're curious, people that had low stress, they kind of died somewhere in the middle. So ironically, the people who lived the longest had the most amount of stress, but the only difference was the way they thought about stress. And that's really important as we go through this episode, as we talk about different types of stressors. You can look at it through that lens. And Chad, if you don't mind, talk about what stress is, the difference between distress and eustress, which is kind of the bad stress and good stress, and then what is hormetic stress? Just starting off with some definitions.
Yeah, great question there. I believe it was Dr. Hans Selye who coined the term eustress. Is that right? Hans Selye, was that him? Am I getting that correct? Sure. Yeah.
Someone can fact check us.
Yeah, fact check that, but I'm pretty sure it is. Back in the early 1900s, there was a researcher and he coined the term eustress, which basically means a good stress on the body. And I think most of us intuitively can recognize that there are good stressors and there are bad stressors. Typically, and unfortunately, we tend to lump all stress as bad stress. Stress tends to get relegated into this kind of all stress is bad. Stress can only be bad on the body. All types of stress. We want to avoid stress at all costs. And the reality of it is, again, exactly what Dr. Wells said, is it's the perception of that stressor that makes all the difference in the world. And really what we're talking about are two kind of separate things, but very intimately linked, right? It's our own internal resilience and self-perception, number one. And then number two, the type of intentional practices that we introduce into our life to help us develop a greater resilience to stress, right? And so we can think about this again in kind of like two general categories, kind of mental and emotional practices that we engage in, plus physical practices that we engage in, right? Because again, it should make sense that in general, stress is going to come at us. We are going to encounter stress in two general types of forms in our life, right? The kind of mental, emotional, social types of stressors that are placed upon us, whether that's job-related stress, relationship stress, stress as parents, stress with kids, stress with social situations, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And then physical stressors, right? Injuries, illness, environmental toxins, all sorts of things like that we encounter as well. And so, number one, in terms of defining terms, again, there are good types of stress. There are bad types of stress. Stress comes in a variety of different forms. Again, whether it's mental, emotional, chemical, and or physical types of stressors. But what we're talking about here is our bodies being not only designed to be resilient to stress, but the fact that some of the highest levels of health and fitness are achieved when we introduce deliberate types of stress into our life and when we engage in practices that allow us to become more resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically to stress in our lives. And the other book that we have referenced numerous times that ties a lot into this is a book by Dr. Anna Limke called Dopamine Nation. And she makes a very compelling argument that really much of the problems we are dealing with, especially with stress today, isn't because life is too stressful, but rather because our core tendency and or natural inclination and tendency as human beings is to lean away from stress and lean into pleasure as a means of coping with the stresses that are upon us. Again, I'm going to say that again. It's not because life is too stressful. It's that rather than face the stress and become more resilient to it, we escape it through a variety of different unhealthy pleasure-based practices, whether that's drugs or alcohol or gambling or addictive behaviors or sex or pornography or eating or any number of things, video games, distractions, social media, all of these different things that people do to try and boost artificially dopamine levels to give us that pleasure hit that we're after. What she argues is the problem is we've leaned too far for too long into that realm in an attempt to avoid stress and or perceived pain. And what that does is that creates this very dangerous rebound effect where eventually too much pleasure, it literally rewires our brain, not in a good way, not in an effective or empowering way, but rather a maladaptive way to where our body becomes desensitized to dopamine and a variety of other different neurotransmitters. And again, her prescription in general in the book, which we highly recommend you read, it's fantastic, is to lean more into positive stress, the good kind of stress, the different types of practices that will cause our bodies, our minds, our spirits, our souls, whatever you want to call it, to become more resilient to these things. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. And to put it into a larger context, oftentimes when people look at Americans and recognize that Americans are, fat and unhealthy physically and mentally and spiritually unhealthy, we're just a sick nation, which we are. The conversation naturally kind of lends itself to bad diet, lack of exercise, kind of these classic, no duh type situations where it's like, yeah, I already know that, right?
Self-evident or seemingly self-evident.
Right. Or often like kind of cliche comments of like, oh, well, it's because we eat too much fast food. And it's like, we know that, but there's a much deeper level to what we're talking about here. And
exactly.
When you look at the how we've constructed our society, we have pleasure around every single corner. We have things that make our lives so much easier physically and mentally easier, that we've become weak to our environment, as crazy as that sounds. And if you haven't experienced this, go to a non-first world country, go to some places in South America, go to some places in Africa, go to places in Asia. And if you see how most of the world lives, it's actually a very high stress situation physically, where people are doing physically demanding jobs. They don't often have consistent meals. They're worried about where their next meal is going to be, how they're going to pay for their homes and raise their kids and all those things. It's actually a very high stress environment where they tend to see less chronic health issues that we see here in the US. And this is why, if you've heard any of our podcasts, we talk and we really beat the drum of like the approach to functional medicine problems has to be more than just nutrition. has to be more than supplementation. And that's what we're talking about here is, and maybe a new concept you're hearing is why the argument for more stress is a therapeutic modality that we're going to unpack and address here.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I would also point out the fact that, again, if you see where the puck is going with functional medicine these days, at least on the kind of real cutting edge, you'll hear a lot of terms that are used, things like mitochondrial dysfunction and or energetic strategies, not necessarily energetic in kind of the kind of woo-woo type space that a lot of people sometimes talk about, energetic healing and things like that. And that's no disrespect to any of those disciplines or things like that. When we say energetic, we're talking about strategies to address head-on mitochondrial dysfunction, whether that be nutritional interventions or lifestyle interventions or tools or modalities like low-level laser therapy, things that are going to upregulate energy and or mitochondrial function, right? So a lot of these different tools, modalities, and strategies that aren't necessarily the supplement-based kind, right? So a lot more is known about things like meditation and breath work and cold immersion therapy and saunas, and a lot of these different tools that we can now use to increase mitochondrial function and things like that. But again, what we're really saying here even goes deeper than that, right? Because our argument oftentimes is, and again, not to keep quoting book after book after book, but I think it's relevant to this discussion, is the book by Dr. Chris Palmer that he recently wrote a couple years ago, Brain Energy, where he makes the argument that oftentimes physicians are somewhat at a loss in the sense that there's an ironic paradox in the sense that they're going to recommend to most of these patients who are eating poorly and deconditioned and not exercising and not engaging in the proper lifestyle habits. They'll recommend those as the solution, but the problem is there's a major gap, and the major gap being is that they lack the physiological energy requisite to engage in those lifestyle changes and habits, right? And oftentimes it becomes very easy to just simply gloss over that and say that the reason why patients don't do that is just because they're lazy or they're just not motivated or they just don't quote unquote want it bad enough. And the reality of it is, when you understand true pathophysiology of mitochondrial dysfunction, you recognize nothing could be further from the truth. It doesn't have anything to do with a lack of motivation, a lack of desire, or that they're just quote unquote lazy. It's that they physiologically do not have the requisite energy. And so what we have to do is kind of twofold. Number one, we have to build up energy, and we'll talk about strategies to do that. But number two, if we don't then take that and use it as a catalyst, if we think that that alone is the end itself rather than the means to the end, you're going to miss out on a huge opportunity to really truly help patients long term. We have a saying at our clinic here that we want to get patients better as fast as possible, but we also want to keep them better as long as possible. And that's really the hope, should be the goal and aim of all healthcare practitioners, is to do that very thing. And so when we talk about these strategies, we can kind of lump them into, again, two general categories, kind of the short-term energetic strategies or short-term stresses on the body, and then the long-term lifestyle stressors that we want to introduce, or the long-term resilience strategies that we want to help patients build. So let's maybe talk about some of these short-term stressors, energetic strategies to induce greater energy in response to it. Let's talk about that for a moment.
One of my favorites that I learned from yours truly, Dr. Woolner, is something called breathwork. And there's lots of different types of breathwork. And what I wanted to point out is the name itself. One of the practitioners we learned this from says it's not breath relax, it's breath work. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be tough to do. And one of my favorite examples of this was when I did recently a CE course that I taught down in Mississippi. At the end of we talked for 12 hours about CE. It was a long day. And I said, okay, at the end of the day, we're going to do some breath work. We're going to do Wim Hof style, like kind of very intense, like hyperventilation type breathing. And I got most of the docs there to do it, which was amazing. I thought most people would kind of step out and then not participate, but they did. And you'd expect that after 12 hours of CE work, especially when I'm teaching CE work, pretty boring stuff, we did it. And at the end of that, I'm like, we went around the room after 15 minutes of breathwork. I'm like, how do you guys feel? They're like, most people are like, I feel great. I feel calm. I feel energetic. I don't feel worn out. They almost like they were there. Like I'd like turned on a light switch, and they all seemed a little bit, if it makes sense, calmer but more energetic at the same time, more grounded, and it was fun. So what we do, it's really simple. The reason I like breathwork is it's free, it's portable, you can take it anywhere, but it does require some work. So it's essentially hyperventilating for about 45 seconds. So just building up oxygen within your body, getting rid of CO2 in your body. And then you just hold your breath. And I'm not a big breath holder. Like I can't like hold my breath underwater for a long period of time, but I can hold my breath when doing breath work for 2 to 2.5 minutes, which is pretty significant for somebody who quote unquote can't hold their breath. And I usually do about 4 rounds of this. I do it a couple times during the week in the morning. And it's difficult, by the way. When I do it, my hands and feet sometimes go numb. It feels kind of funny. I'm used to the sensations now, but when I started it felt really weird. Sometimes my hands will actually kind of contract. And what I found is that I get a burst of energy in the morning for about 3 to 4 hours, where it's like not coffee buzzy type energy. I just feel
natural sustained energy,
clear-headed. I'll oftentimes get some kind of life epiphanies as I'm doing my breath hold. Mm-hmm. And it's so simple. Dr. Woolner and I, when we travel for work, sometimes we'll do breath work in our hotel room and things like that. And that's just one really simple strategy. I prefer like the intense breathing. I also like exercise as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I noticed that breath work is kind of similar to doing some kind of aerobic activity. Like if you're biking or running or doing HIIT workouts, there's of course a breathing breath work element to exercise in and of itself. But I found that's a really simple strategy, and one that your patients can and will do. If you look at, sometimes practitioners will dismiss things like this because you can't buy it anywhere, right? There's no it's not a physically tangible thing like a supplement would be, or a nutrition book would be that you could buy from the store,
or a technology or a tool, or
it's just something we all start doing when we're born, and we do it all the way through death, right? So it often gets, I think, dismissed. But this is, if you compare this to other strategies like changing diet or nutrition, I would argue that breathwork is so much simpler because you compared to diet, you don't have to meal prep and go to the grocery store and buy things and cook and eat the thing that maybe you don't want to eat.
Anytime, anywhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
This modality by itself is very profound and can have incredible results for patients who need a little bit more stress in their life. So that's one simple strategy.
Yeah. And let's talk just real quick without getting deep into the physiology. Let's talk in general about the physiology of why this strategy works, right? You hit on it real quick. What we're doing when we do this kind of classic, we call it reset breathing. Wim Hof is the guy who made it probably the most popular, where again, for, 3, 4, 5 minutes, you're doing just hyperventilation. You're laying down. Typically, you don't do this around water, obviously, for obvious reasons. You lay in a relaxed environment, but really what you're doing is you're hyperoxygenating the body. You're hyperventilating, right? Getting lots and lots of oxygen into your body, into your blood, into your tissues. And then what you're doing is you're holding your breath for an extended period of time. What that breath hold is doing is that is increasing the buildup in your body of CO2. Now, the classic story that we've heard is this very binary view of oxygen and CO2. O2 good, CO2 bad. That is not true. That's not a correct answer. It's far more nuanced than that. Again, I don't want to go deep into the physiology, but just understand that our body's ability to tolerate CO2, or other words, there's a test you can do called a CO2 tolerance test. I would just say Google how to do that, or look up a YouTube video on how to perform a simple CO2 tolerance test. But CO2 tolerance, our ability to tolerate CO2 buildup in our body, is a direct window into stress resiliency, or it's a kind of an analog that we can use as a means of looking at or measuring or gauging our own stress resilience. And so that's a marker that we can kind of look at indirectly that will reference or reflect one's individual stress resilience. And so what CO2 buildup does is it increases the efficiency to which our body can utilize oxygen. And the reason being is very simple, is because proportionally the level of CO2 that we have in our body increases the offloading of oxygen from red blood cells delivered to the target tissues, right? We oftentimes think of this kind of physiology from one perspective, and that is when we breathe in oxygen, it goes into our lungs, the hemoglobin on our red blood cells attaches to that oxygen, and then end of story, right? It goes to the respective place. But there's one more key element to this process physiologically, and that is that oxygen has to be offloaded or decoupled from the hemoglobin attached to the red blood cell to the target tissue, wherever that is. And in order for that to take place, we need the presence of CO2 in our body, because that's what helps to a large degree offload the oxygen from our red blood cells. And again, proportionately, if we can tolerate a higher degree of CO2 in our body, we become more efficient at offloading that oxygen, thereby utilizing oxygen in our respective tissues. And so that's why this is such an important strategy. And this is why breath work, when we do that, can help us to, number one, increase our CO2 tolerance, thereby increasing our oxygen utilization, and also thereby increasing just our general resilience to stress. And this goes beyond the physical. Andrew kind of touched on it as well. The mental and emotional, people are finding more and more such profound benefits from strategies like breathwork. And again, breathwork comes in a variety of different shapes and forms, right? There's different types of meditation. There's different types of, deep and heavy and slow and soft and mild and everything in between. And we're not going to obviously go into all of those different ones, but breathwork is one of them. Andrew hit on exercise being obvious, right? High intensity exercise is a very common stressor that we can use, right? Hot and with cold strategies. Yes.
Oh, just briefly on exercise. Exercise can be different things for different people. The important thing is you're putting stress on your body. So it can be HIIT workouts. It can be weightlifting. It can be more endurance type activity. It can just simply be walking. And sometimes when people think about exercise, they think of it negatively, like, oh, I don't like to really exert myself that way. But oftentimes people will find ways of exercising that they like to do. So for example, team sports like tennis or pickleball, that's exercise. So sometimes we think of that as like a sport or a game. That's exercise. So when we're talking about this, I'm putting my practitioner hat on, helping our patients figure out what type of exercise is best suited for them, find out what they like to do. And there's a whole host of, from a hormetic standpoint, there's a whole host of things that happens physiologically to your body. I'm going to briefly go through them because this episode is not really so much on the benefits of exercise, but mitochondrial biogenesis. So when you exercise, you're releasing AMPK, PGC1A, which are signaling molecules that tells your body to produce more mitochondria, brand new mitochondria. So what you're doing is you're increasing not only the number of mitochondria you have, but also the sensitivity of your body being able to create new energy. That's why you feel good when you exercise on a regular basis. You have more energy. It's because your body's making more mitochondria. Interestingly enough, when you exercise, some people say, well, exercise is bad for you because it creates free radicals. And it does create free radicals, what we call reactive oxygen species. But it does it in a good way. So what it does is it actually signals your body to upregulate antioxidant defense systems like glutathione and SOD. So that's another way that your body, from a hormetic standpoint, is benefiting from exercise. And then it's also, there's a whole bunch of other things like upregulating your stress response genes. So your heat shock proteins like HSPs, NRF2, these are all engaged to help repair damaged proteins and detoxify your cells. So we can really dive maybe deeper on that in a different episode, but just know that exercise doesn't have to be your classic, oh, I hate going to the gym type of scenario. Yeah. Just find a thing that you can do regularly to
just
move
start
your
moving.
Body. Yep.
Just start moving. Yeah. One of the best things for our body. Our body was designed to move. Cold immersion therapy. A lot of people are talking about that, have been for quite some time. It's almost becoming somewhat culturally cliche at this point in time, but it does work. It's very, very helpful for the body in a variety of different ways. One of the simplest ways is it does increase dopamine sensitivity. It's one of the things that Dr. Anna Lemke talks about in her book, Dopamine Nation. It's one of the fastest ways to kind of resetting or restoring dopamine sensitivity, cold immersion therapy. Low-level laser therapy, believe it or not, is a hormetic strategy, is a hormetic stressor on the body. Again, a good type of stress on the body. What it is it's using specific wavelengths of light energy or specific colors of light energy to stimulate the body, Predominantly, it helps to stimulate the mitochondria, causes them to produce more energy or increase the efficiency of energy in response to that quote unquote stressor on the body. So this is one of the most powerful tools we use at our clinic and have for quite some time. And then intermittent fasting. So restricting our intake of food is another powerful stressor on the body that has some incredible benefits, ranging all the way from obviously the things that you could probably imagine, like it helps to restore or reset sensitivity to a variety of different hormones, including, not surprisingly, insulin. It helps to reset or reestablish sensitivity to insulin, and or just in general start to balance out our blood sugar, which obviously should make total sense. It's another great way for us to reduce the bad kind of stress on our gut, right? When we're not eating, it allows the gut to kind of self-heal. One of the other things that many people are hearing about, this buzzword autophagy, when we enter into these kind of deep, prolonged fasts, right, typically right around that 24-hour mark and beyond, it starts to activate a process in our body, a normal kind of self-regulating, self-cleanup process called autophagy, which is basically a fancy word for when the body does its own cleanup and clearance. It'll start to go through and different cells will go through, immune cells will go through and kind of eat up and clean up and basically debride dead or unhealthy cells to kind of clean things up and help as part of just a general detoxification process in our body. So,
and then the last thing I want to talk about to kind of wrap all this up is just the doing of hard things itself. It doesn't matter. It can be work hard things. It can be sports related hard things. It can be all the modalities we just mentioned. But what you're doing is you're retraining your brain. So when you look at your prefrontal cortex, which is kind of your brain's CEO, if you will, what you're doing is you're enhancing your control over your amygdala, which is your brain's fear center. And what you're doing is through neuroplasticity, you're rewiring the way that your body responds to stress. So you can train your brain to sort of shut down the panic mode when you're experiencing something hard and transition to problem solver mode. So each time you step into a cold immersion barrel, each time you exercise, each time you do breath work, you're training your body that you have way more control over the response that your body issues than not. And so this is all about from the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about how we live in a really soft society where we don't have a lot of stressors. We're intentionally training our brains to train our bodies on how to respond to stressors. The more often you do that in a controlled environment, the more your brain tells your body, oh, we have full control over the situation. And the body then sends signals back up to the brain saying, we're fine down here. And so it has a lot to do with brain training, not just so much body training. It's both of those things.
Absolutely. And if what we've been sharing here resonates with you on any level, stress resiliency is one of the core pillars that we teach and have baked into all of our clinical protocols for our patients. And so the nice part is with the Simplified Functional Medicine program, you don't have to sit here and figure out how do we begin incorporating these things in such a way that patients will actually do them. These are actually baked into our curriculum, and they're done and designed in such a way based off of today's latest research on not just the sciencey stuff of what to do, but also the science behind behavioral change and habit formation, how to break bad habits, how to build new good habits. And so we have that all wired in and baked into our protocols, as well as the patient education portion. We get a high level of compliance with our patients. Therefore, we get really incredible results clinically. Our practitioners enjoy some of the best clinical results out there. In fact, we would argue and be so bold as to say we would put our clinical protocols up against any others out there today. And a big part of it is things like this that we have incorporated and kind of figured out. We've kind of cracked the code, so to speak, on how to get patients to actually engage in these types of practices consistently over time so that they do rebuild resiliency and they are able to kind of overcome the bad kind of stress through combating it with the good kind of stress. And so hopefully, again, this has been valuable. If you want to find out more, schedule a free discovery call with someone from our team. That'll likely be Dr. Andrew Wells. We'll find out what your situation is, what your goals are, see if we can help you, and we'll go from there. And then we'll share with you exactly what we do and how we do it. And if it's a good fit, we'll have you join a group of amazing practitioners all across the country, and we'll go from there. So thank you so much. We hope that this has been massively valuable for you, and we'll talk to you again on the next episode.